All right, welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today, Geoffrey Chiu, he's finally made it. It's been a while. Welcome, Geoffrey.
It's been a while. Thanks for having me, man. Yeah, we had to reschedule. I was a bit busy. I was sick, but I'm all healthy now.
Now, sick, traveling, all of it. It's been a while since I've been trying to get you on. You were on when I first started this podcast, you were on my initial list of people to bring on. I really enjoy your philosophy of training. That. I think I mentioned it in the William Whalen podcast as well, actually, how I enjoy your content, enjoy the way you see strength conditioning for athletic development. I think we align on a lot of different things too. So do you want to maybe give a brief background about yourself and we'll go straight into some of those?
I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm a martial artist. I'm owner of GC Performance Training. So what I offer is one-on-one coaching for combat athletes, online coaching. I try to write a lot about combat sports and S&C and how I think development should be for fight sports. And I've been lucky to connect with a lot of like-minded coaches and really draw from everyone's experiences.
Yeah, if anyone's following Geoffrey on Instagram or anything like that, you'll see a lot of that content. And I guess you could say it differs a lot from the typical mainstream fighter Instagram of doing a whole lot of random things. So let's maybe dive into a bit of that philosophy. I'm going to give you a very general overarching question. That is, what is your philosophy of strength conditioning for combat athletes?
My general philosophy is we start from the combat sport itself, and then from there we branch out and we analyze what strength and power demands we need for the sport, what endurance and conditioning demands we need from the sport, and what we're already getting from the sport. So in terms of strength training, in a lot of combat sports like MMA, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, you're not getting that high-low training stimulus, whether that's to build muscle or to build rate of force development or change your hormonal response. We're not getting a lot of that from the sport itself. So I see strength training as a necessary supplement.
Nice. And in the conditioning side, is that a similar approach in terms of how you're trying to supplement what's happening from technical training?
That used to be when I first started working with fighters, I read like Joel Jameson books. I'm reading exercise physiology books, and that's kind of where I branched out. I was in that kind of mindset of lots of aerobic training because we need to build the gas tank. We need to do all these runs and assault bike intervals and all of that, what I consider general modalities because they don't really mimic the sport. But in the last 2 years, I've been pretty vocal about getting at least 95% of your conditioning within the sport itself. And that goes over some people's heads sometimes because I'm telling people, hey, we don't really need to dive super deep into energy systems. Like I know you've had guests on and like PhD researchers talking about sprint interval training. Personally, that's not my philosophy on building conditioning. I don't see conditioning as solely energy system development. I see it as tactical, strategical. What I see conditioning is are you able to repeat the sporting movements under various environments, stressful environments? Are you able to do it in training, in sparring, and then in the fight?
I love that. I'm actually going to have Vern Gambetta on. It'll be the week after this podcast drops, and he's obviously been very vocal about, I guess you could say, anti-energy systems as well. He's of the idea of the interplay between energy systems and pretty much what you're saying there. And I really like that philosophy and look into sports training too. Obviously, you can have a pure physiological approach, which is, hey, I'm just targeting energy system adaptations, or you can have almost like what you mentioned there, like a work capacity approach. You know, can I sustain whatever the output is for however long it is and repeat it over and over again? And then can I manipulate training, essentially variables, to be able to sustain whatever power output or workload it is for short, medium, long term and things like that? But do you want to maybe give an example of obviously you talked about specific conditioning within that. How maybe let's give some specific examples for strikers, MMA, and for jiu-jitsu athletes. What will be some examples of a specific conditioning session for this? I mean, obviously there's lots of different work to rest ratios, but just some exercise examples within that.
Right. So when we talk about, let's say, aerobic development, and we agree that aerobic development is all about creating structural demands, making sure our heart's pumping out enough blood, everything that you would read in an exercise physiology book. I think S&C coaches and sports scientists understand that point, but they apply it in the wrong way. So they would say, okay, go on the bike for 45 minutes or 45 to 60 minutes because that's what aerobic training is. But I would argue that that could be better spent on the heavy bag or shadowboxing or practicing some sort of sports specific skill. So that's why I always say skills practice is conditioning. And a lot of skill coaches know this. They just use running as a supplement, but
yeah,
they know that in order to be a better martial artist, you have to practice more martial arts. And I'm just afraid this generation of fighters is, I guess, too worried about modern training sciences. They'll listen to the sports scientists, they'll run a lot, skip a lot, but they're not boxing enough or they're not practicing their sport enough.
Is there a point in which you wouldn't prescribe as much specific conditioning if their technical load is really high? Do you have maybe a general benchmark of when you'd be like, okay, we probably need to spend more time doing things like biking, running, whatever it is, versus boxing for conditioning?
In terms of technical load, I'm looking at how many hours they're training per day. If a recreational athlete comes to me and says, I want to be a competitive boxer, I'm boxing 1 hour each session, and I'm doing 3 boxing sessions a week. Can I add in assault bike intervals? Can I add in runs? And I'm like, you're barely at that minimum threshold of what it takes to be an elite athlete. So if you're boxing 3 times a week, then you might want to even double that. And your conditioning is going to get better just from that.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I've said this before, I think the problem that we kind of face in combat sports currently is there's a big influx of S&C coaches like us, sports scientists coming into the field. They're purely looking at it from a physiological standpoint, which works really well based off of the background that sports scientists and S&C coaches have, which is cyclical endurance sports. They look at marathon runners, they look at cyclists, they put them on like the VO2 max machine, they measure blood lactate. I think they are trying to reduce combat sports performance to purely physiology, which doesn't really align with what high performance combat sports is. High performance combat sports to me means the physiotherapy side, the tactical side. Are we building the right culture in the gym? How are they developing skills wise? What kind of development system do they have in terms of like skill development and drilling and sparring? So that's what I really want to touch on in the next few years.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily step away from strength and conditioning, because I'm still a strength and conditioning coach by profession, but I'm looking to integrate strength exercises and what I know about energy systems to apply it to combat sports.
So how would that look then are you talking about integrating, obviously, as a skill set for yourself, but would you then integrate that within, say, a technical training session itself? You're looking to almost blend the approaches together, so a session is not purely technical, it's designed around technical training, but also developing the physical attributes you need?
Yeah, so for example, something that I've been doing for quite a few years now is applying what I know about energy systems to, let's say, heavy bag training. And let's say I'll prescribe heavy bag intervals for one of my athletes. I'll say, we're going to work on these skills on the heavy bag because that's what you need based on what I know about striking as a very amateur striking coach. And then as a S&C coach, I know that I need to give you this amount of work and this amount of rest intervals just to not necessarily target the energy systems, but I'm seeing which work to rest ratios work well with whatever skills we're trying to develop. Like if we're trying to develop explosive punching power on the heavy bag, for example, then my rest intervals have to be prescribed accordingly.
Yeah.
Whether that's complete rest or longer rest in general. And then some coaches would call that, quote unquote, power endurance.
Yeah.
But I don't like calling it power. Like, I find it better for myself to create buy-in if I'm speaking in the language of the boxer.
Yeah. So you're just calling it explosive power or explosive punching work or something easy to understand.
Yep.
Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned maybe the recreational boxer that's coming, that's boxing 3 hours a week, and he wants to do extra conditioning, so it's better spent doing the specific style of conditioning. Have you got any, I guess, maybe amateur guys that are training full-time or pro guys training full-time that have really high boxing loads, and what would you consider as almost a full-time boxing load before considering doing conditioning outside of the specific modalities?
I would say, on average, if you're training 5 to 6 times a week and you're doubling up on some of the days, like 2 a days, that's when I would consider adding on like a full day of, not a full day, a separate session of, let's say, assault bike intervals or hill sprints or something like that. But I do like to integrate some running and just low volume running, low volume skipping to tack on to their skill sessions.
Okay, how does that look?
And I think, let's say they have a technical session and I know they're sparring, maybe they're getting 5 to 8 rounds and that's all they're doing for that class. I would say, okay, that if we're counting this as a high training day, then the volume isn't enough, I'd say. So I would add, let's say, skip rope intervals, 3 rounds, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Just to keep that training load high for that day.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's probably good for anyone listening as well who's maybe short on time. Kind of that one technical session is their training session for the day, and being able to tack something on the end is easy enough versus trying to do a second session.
But like skill coaches know this, and they prescribe it really well. Maybe better than S&C coaches. They work with the boxers for more hours per week. They know, although it's old school, they know what needs to be done in terms of general conditioning.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. You obviously mentioned about sparring. Okay, that might be a higher day. How do you structure your weeks then for your fighters? Obviously, you mentioned sparring, there might be a higher day, but do you follow like a high-low model? Do you follow maybe like a low, medium, high, or are you just trying to fit things in when the fighter has time to do it?
When I had a smaller roster of fighters, I would use the high-low. And now that I'm working with more fighters, I realize that their schedule is just completely fucked. Like, it's impossible to do high-low. I applaud anyone who can apply the high-low model, like, consistently from week to week. So currently what I do is just, I ask them, what days do you feel the freshest? Yeah. And then we place those important strength and power days, maybe in the morning or anything but after training, because we want them to be pretty fresh if we want to make those gains on the strength sessions.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So sometimes they have to double up. Sometimes they're doing it on days they're not training skills. I feel like a lot of fighters are at the mercy of either their class schedule or their team. I think we all, like S&C coaches, have this kind of illusion that every athlete we work with is some pro that's able to control every variable of their own camp, which just isn't true. Like more than half of my team are amateurs, but obviously they still work hard. They put in the work. It's just scheduling that we have to work around.
Yeah. On that scheduling as well, obviously you mentioned doing the strength power in the mornings. I guess some people will say, hey, shouldn't I do the technical training first because that's more important and I need to do the skills, and then shouldn't I do strength power in the afternoon? What's your philosophy around that?
My philosophy is you have to work with your schedule. If you don't have morning technical trainings and they just don't offer that at your gym, like
you
do.
Yeah.
If they do have to perform strength in the morning, then I keep that in mind and I lower the volume a bit, make sure that they're as fresh as possible heading into each session.
Yeah. What does your strength training? What do your strength training or strength and power sessions look like? I know I've seen a few clips and things on Instagram, and you've got a few different athletes going on there. And I guess what surrounds your philosophy regarding strength and power training? Obviously, you mentioned there you might lower the volumes. Are you looking at like more of a low volume approach? You want to keep them fresh for technical sessions? I guess I'm assuming it depends on the time of year and when they have fights coming up, how much they're doing.
I don't think it's much different than other experienced S&C combat sports coaches. Exercise selection might be a bit different. Let's say Will loves what do you call it? Split squats with hand supported split squats. A lot of my athletes just don't have access to that, so I feel like we're at the mercy of our equipment sometimes. I like to program concurrently, so I don't like phases where we're heavily invested into power, heavily invested into like heavy load strength exercises. I like to just keep it all in the mix. So each session would look like dynamic warm up, some plyometrics, some ballistics, whether that's slams or med ball punches or whatever, and then we get into the compound lifts, end off with some accessories, and then some robustness work.
Nice. Do you want to maybe dive a little bit into your robustness work? I know you've mentioned that quite a bit as well on your social media. What are you trying to achieve with your robustness work, and I guess what are some example exercises and things you're doing there for your athletes?
Robustness work, robustness circuits is what I call it. I'm not even sure where I got the name from. Maybe I didn't make it up, but hopefully I'm popularizing it. But I'm essentially putting 3 to 4 exercises together for that based on the athlete's injury history and the most common injuries within their sport. So let's say if we take boxing, for example, I'll look up boxing injuries, what's the prevalence for each body part, and then I'll look at my athlete's injury history, and then, okay, let's say neck, we need strengthening. Let's say our boxer's got a history of knee pain. I'll throw in some direct knee exercises in there. And then maybe something like the lower leg complex, like the ankle or the wrist, which is usually the first points of contact for combat sport athletes. So I'll throw it all together within a circuit at the end of the session, and they'll perform anywhere from 2 to 4 sets of that, no rest in between. Let's say like a lying neck curl with the harness, dumbbell wrist curls, and then maybe some split squats or split squat isometrics. I think they're just exercises and body parts that are easily forgotten and people don't like to do. Like, they like to do the jumps, they like to do their med ball slams and punches, but when it comes to the boring shit, like, they tend to skip
calf raises.
Calf raises, exactly.
My
philosophy on that is like, work at a low to moderate volume, and then we get that in frequently, and then over the training year, you've developed a ton of neck strength, a ton of wrist and forearm strength, grip strength that translates to the sport.
How would that circuit differ for, let's just say, for a grappler, like a jiu-jitsu athlete? Do you have certain exercises you go to there?
So we might look at the hip and the knee more, or the shoulder joint, just based off of injury data.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, like, grapplers suffer different injuries than striking athletes. Striking athletes get blows to the head, but grappling athletes are resisting their opponent, and their opponent normally puts on a lot of force within, like, the elbow joint or their shoulder joint, depending on the submission.
Or you
So
get
we're working
inverted and
around that
someone's
as well.
crushing your lower neck.
Yep. Yep, exactly.
All things there. So stop inverting, everyone. You're going to fuck your neck up. Now,
Yeah.
if you do things all right, then you're not going to do too much damage. But let's go back into some of that training week structure. Obviously, you're fitting it in wherever. Do you maybe have, or are you able to share an example of, you're working mainly with boxers now, I think, in person. Do you want to maybe share like how a typical training week looks for these guys?
Yeah, they're always going to have one rest day, and they could be shadowboxing, they could be doing some dynamic warm-ups or mobility work, but I always want at least one dedicated rest day for my fighters. They're probably going to be training boxing anywhere from 5 to 6 times a week, and then we tack on 2 really high-quality strength training sessions, and focusing on high-load exercises, plyometrics, robustness circuits like we talked about.
Yeah.
And then I try to work around their sparring. I'm obviously not going to put a strength and a boxing session on a day before sparring.
Yeah.
But it really depends on the athlete. I've worked with boxers that like to get a lift in before sparring days.
Okay. That's not too dissimilar from how a few sports teams are doing things now, with almost like using it as a 15-20 minute primer in the gym of power stuff, right? And then going out onto the field and doing high speed, whatever it is, or their high intensity sports training.
Yeah. You've worked in a lot of team sports. For the players that don't play, their training load is obviously a little higher because their playing time is lower.
Yeah.
Let's say you get like a rugby team or a football team.
Yeah.
Obviously, not everyone gets the same playing time.
Yeah.
Does their S&C look different?
Yeah, they usually do extra stuff.
Yeah.
So it depends. Like for example, so you have like if you're playing Saturday, Friday would be like a captain's run for the team, and then obviously the non-playing guys typically will either be on the field or they'll do some of the extra stuff then. So it might be extra gym, extra conditioning, whatever it is. And then they'll have almost like Saturday, Sunday. Saturday they might do something, but usually Saturday, Sunday off. And then Monday they'll do more than the guys who played in training. But then as well, you've obviously got guys that are on the bench that play less minutes than those guys starting who might play a full match. So then straight after the match, you'll have guys that played, like, say, less than 20 minutes. They'll be on the field. I mean, that's why you see, if you see on TV, you see people running after the games on the field. Some players. So they're basically doing top-ups just to essentially keep everyone near the same level throughout. But it's some people have it down to an exact science, but it's not always that easy because obviously the game's chaotic.
Yeah, I find that to be the more difficult part of the profession, just managing training load, managing the team, managing the culture. I think that's really underrated compared to things that we normally talk about on social media, like exercise selection, and we fucking go at each other's throats just based off of exercises. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah. I mean, it's the team aspect of combat sport. I mean, it's having full-time S&Cs within a team is relatively new, right?
I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
like out here in Thailand, you won't find that in Muay Thai camps, or they'll hire some dude who got his bachelor's and never really looked at any information outside of school. Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. The teams that have good S&C coaches and performance coaches are usually like multidisciplinary teams, like Tiger Muay Thai or what other camps out here? I don't even remember. But like the MMA focused camps, American Kick, AKA, or Tiger Muay Thai, or the Bangtan Muay Thai. All these MMA teams, they usually have better nutritional support, better strength coach support behind them.
Okay.
I don't think the Muay Thai gyms see the benefits just yet.
Interesting. Is that just like a
Like
tradition?
I was training at one of the gyms back in, I'm not going to name which one, but back in 2019.
Yeah.
They had a conditioning coach who was basically like a runner or a marathon coach. And all he would do is make sure that all of the guys hit red line for each Muay Thai session. And if they don't hit red line, it's not a good session.
Damn. So with heart rate monitor, you mean? Just see,
Yeah, with
see
heart
it's
rate
in the red?
monitors, yeah. Yeah, all the fighters would have heart rate monitors on. It would show up on the TV, like, hey, you're in the yellow. You need to work harder.
Damn.
That was the extent of the sports science or the S&C.
This dude was getting paid full time?
I'm not sure full time, but he had a position at a pretty big gym.
That's crazy. Eh? I mean, I shouldn't say that's crazy because literally all over the world, in every sport, at the highest level, you get the same thing. It's just probably now trickled down, into combat sports now that strength conditioning and stuff has become more popular. But the idea that Muay Thai gyms there haven't kind of gone down that road, is that a tradition thing? Like with the Thais, I mean, they spend a lot of time running and then just doing Muay Thai basically, and that's kind of how they like to do it and they don't want to change?
I think an S&C coach from the West would come to Thailand and say they're doing everything wrong, but somehow they're winning.
Yeah.
That's maybe the approach I took when I first visited here, like a few years ago. I don't see it that way anymore. I see it as they're obviously doing the right things in terms of training volume.
Yeah.
But there are some aspects of sports science that we can bring into their traditional camps, like the way they peak for fights or how we manage their training load. Like, okay, running is good for them. It builds the tendons in their lower leg. It builds their calves. It builds leg endurance. But we don't need to do so much of it. So
you
there's
mentioned
a
about
big
peaking.
cultural aspect too.
Yeah, you mentioned about peaking as well. How do you like to peak your guys for fight? What changes in those last couple of weeks?
I'd say 20 to 30% volume drop and volume drop on their training, just because sparring picks up, they're getting tired, they have to cut weight.
Is that your training that you're?
I'd say
specific strength. Is that your specific strength conditioning training you're dropping volume on, or does that include their technical training?
That does not include the technical training.
Okay,
I don't really have control over that, and I imagine a lot of S&C coaches that do.
Yeah.
But that's the strength. That's the strength work. Maybe I'll probably take out all, if not most, of the general conditioning, like the runs and the assault bike stuff. I'll take it out 2 or 3 weeks out.
Gotcha.
Because we both know at that point, like, you can't get fitter. It's just about dropping fatigue so your fitness can show.
Yeah.
And the Thais here don't do that.
Oh, they just like blast all the way through.
Like I mentioned before, I don't think it's a sports science thing. I think it's a culture thing. A lot of elite Thais, they have like 2 or 3 week fight camps.
Okay.
Because they've trained their whole lives. Their technique and skill is so much higher than the foreigners here.
Yeah.
That they'll train for like maybe really hard for 2 or 3 weeks and then take some time off. So the way they approach it is completely different.
Interesting. Well, with the elite Thai athletes that are now fighting in like one championship and things like that, have they taken a different approach then? I don't know if you have any insight into that. But are they doing like what you're saying there, or are they taking a different approach?
One championship's given everyone a kick in the ass, I think. With the prize money now and all that money on the line, they're starting to train more consistently, like UFC fighters would, MMA, like high-profile MMA fighters would. So, yeah, I think they're training a bit more consistently, going along the lines of what would be considered best practices nowadays.
Yeah.
But I think habits still kick in, and some of them get a bit lazy. I mean, I know people here, so I've heard some inside news, and that's just how it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in most sports. The top talented guys are not always don't always have the highest work ethic. They just get by on how good they are.
Yeah, the best fighters aren't always the best high performing athletes. Let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, and which probably bursts a lot of bubbles for people looking to try and make it, who are putting the effort in and everything, but still falling short. Sometimes it's more than just training and work ethic, you know.
Yeah, that's a big thing I've learned traveling here. Is just you have to work under their conditions, and then trying to create some buy-in. Like for me to go to a Muay Thai camp, a traditional one, and be like, hey, I'm an S&C coach, here's my resume, they'll just tell you to fuck off. Especially if you're not Thai and you don't speak Thai, there's definitely a language barrier there. And it's like a trust thing. Yeah.
One interesting thing you've actually been posting about over probably a while now, I thought was quite interesting, was the transitions between striking and grappling in MMA, and how you've decided to, I guess, attack and develop and training, essentially condition fighters for that demand that they see in MMA. Do you want to maybe dive a little bit into that and how you saw that as an issue?
Was that me? What'd I say?
I don't know. You posted a video of you guys doing specific conditioning, pairing striking and grappling.
Oh, that was for like MMA specific conditioning, right?
Yeah.
That was just driving home the point I mentioned earlier, like doing your intervals on the heavy bag or on the dummy, or setting games within your shadowboxing or heavy bag drills, just to mimic what you would in an MMA gym. That was my way of saying, like, hey, these are better alternatives than just jumping on the VersaClimber or jumping on the stationary bike.
Gotcha.
Because if you looked at the heart rate response, it would be identical. Like if you looked at 2 pages of heart rate responses, you couldn't tell which one was general versus specific. And if that's the case, why would you not go with the specific one?
Yeah. And I think that transition as well, obviously having to get on and off the ground, having to go from some kind of isometric grappling position, standing up, then having to feel loose again to throw various strikes and things like that. I guess there's something that can be trained, and you can, again, conditioning obviously more than just energy systems. You're conditioning yourself for those demands that you might encounter in the cage.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've been playing around with wearable resistance, correct? With the
not the last few
Exogen,
months, but I did, yeah. With
how'd you find
it? The Layla Move Tech. It was good. I've used it with 2 or 3 athletes. 2 athletes. I've used it with 2 athletes. They've given me good feedback, but it wasn't like a big game changer.
Okay.
I imagine it would. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
I imagine it would be more beneficial for maybe cyclical sports where we're trying to get percentage increases in movement efficiency and biomechanics. But I've used it with primarily strikers, and the biggest effect we saw was like a good potentiation effect. After using them for 2 or 3 rounds, we took them off and their kits were flying. And that lasted about, I'd say, 2 more rounds. So like 8-10 minutes or so.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, if you're talking long-term training effects, if you did that long enough, I'm sure that would potentially have some benefit down the line. I know if anyone's listening,
and it's pretty non-invasive. Sure. If you like load it correctly, it's really non-invasive. It doesn't change technique much, if at all.
Yeah.
I think there's this. I've said this before, but people don't like punching with dumbbells because they think that it changes their form. Like I used to buy into that, but not so much anymore. I don't think striking or grappling is about perfect technique. It's about finding effective technique and then working within that range of what is biomechanically efficient for the athlete.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think, that the striking with dumbbell thing about being too heavy, sure, if you did it like all the time, but I think as well within, obviously, if you look at the heavy sled or resistance sprinting research, obviously that was the prevailing thought too back maybe a couple of decades ago, where you shouldn't sprint with more than 10% of your body weight because it changes the way you sprint, and that can negatively affect your sprint technique. And then obviously in the past decade, a lot of research has come out around, using 70% of your body weight or even more to essentially improve acceleration, horizontal force, all that kind of stuff, and translating to
but you can also argue sprint technique would correlate closer to, let's say, performance outcomes in track and field or field sports than compared to punching technique.
That's a good point.
To combat sports performance outcomes. Because we like to think that, okay, if you have great punch technique, that's all that matters. But there's so many tactical and strategical variables in play.
Yeah.
That's why people argue all the time, do we punch with our hook like this or like this?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Because different systems and different coaches will teach you different things. And it's, I think, our job as coaches to understand, okay, where are the commonalities between all these training systems? And then we get our principles from there and we work from there.
So are you using, say, dumbbell shadowboxing at all? Does that form a part of your program? And if so, why? And if not, why?
I do it myself. I hold these small like eggs. They're probably like a pound each. I don't prescribe it. But if an athlete came up to me and said, hey, can I add weights to my shadowboxing rounds? I'd be like, yeah, go ahead. Just keep it under, let's say, 2 pounds.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of martial arts is about feel. Like, it feels different to hold a bit of weight, whether that gives you a physiological effect or not. I can hold it for 3 rounds and then do unweighted for another 3 rounds, and that's going to give me different feedback.
Okay.
And like
that answered my question.
Fighters liking that feedback is enough for me to be like, okay, let's keep it.
Gotcha.
I don't really need to go deep into research and be like, hey, it changes our punch angle by 2 degrees, and hey, the research says it doesn't help.
Yeah. No, fair enough. And if anyone's interested in learning more about what we're talking about with the Exogen lighter, a few episodes back with Joe Dolcetti, it's must have been 2 or 3 episodes back now where we do a deep dive into the Exogen suit there. But what I think has good applications, at least within grappling, is the idea of, or even potentially within boxing, was the bodysuit during weight cutting. So being able to add the weight back on that you're losing during a weight cut, and then still training with it on and training with that weight, then taking it off a couple of weeks or a week or so before, and then training without that weight, and then just seeing.
I've actually never thought about that. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So there was a case. So it was. I won't say who did it, but basically it was the guy was training for his first.
We're keeping it secretive over here.
Yeah, I don't know. No one mentioned his name.
No name drops.
I heard his name once, and I was like, "Oh shit, it was that guy." But then it wasn't a fighter; it was another coach. And so he was running his first triathlon or ultra or whatever. And as he was training, and as he was losing weight from all the training, he was adding that weight back on with the vest. And so he would train at his same body weight at the beginning, all the way through his prep, and then 1 or 2 weeks out, he took the vest off, and then just like hit fucking crazy endurance PBs.
He hit PBs based just doing that.
Well, faster race times.
Right.
And I was like, damn, that's like thinking about the applications of that within weight cutting sports, being able to train. I mean, it's pretty much non-invasive because they're kind of just like sticky things you put on. You could box with that.
That's one of my biggest philosophies. Like, if we're experimenting with something, it should be non-invasive from a skill expression standpoint.
Yeah.
If it doesn't really hurt the fighter, and we don't have to change the whole training schedule because of one training modality or method, then I think it's worth a try. And I think that's the arts part of martial arts and combat sports.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, like
That's
literally just put the
that's why I
business
think like when sports scientists come into combat sports with very rigid models on what performance should be, and we point to the physiology textbooks and all this stuff, I think they're falling a bit short, and they're not acknowledging the arts and the culture of combat sports.
Do you think S&Cs in combat sports should have maybe some, or should be at least training the martial arts or have a background in them then? Obviously, that's always a contentious debate within coaching is, you know, should you...
Whether you need to be...
Yeah, whether you need to be part of that sport. Yeah.
Personally, it helps me connect with my athletes. Like I have I have more experience with striking sports than I do grappling sports. So even when I train grapplers, I can put together a great strength training program, but in terms of skill development and skill periodization, I feel like I don't have as big of a say, and maybe I could bridge the gap a bit more if I grappled a lot more and I understood all the principles behind submission grappling and wrestling, and I can get it myself, but that's just not the case. I don't think it makes you a worse strength coach. You can still understand the demands of the sport really well. But if you're trying to bridge the gap and you're trying to become more than a strength coach, if you're trying to become a performance coach and kind of influence skill development and how the training camp goes, I think it's much better if you have experience in the sport. Yeah.
No, for sure. And obviously there's different, all sports have different cultures as well. Like, it's like, for example, to take a really broad examples, like rugby and soccer. I mean, those are two, like, those worlds are complete opposites when it comes to training. I mean, I couldn't imagine working with a soccer team or a soccer environment. It would be hell. Just like allergic to all hard training, allergic to weights, allergic to everything in that, versus a sport like rugby where, you know, the gym is kind of part and parcel with the training there. So it's, I know what you mean, obviously. And then obviously within combat sports, you have slightly different cultures within the different martial arts too, right? So yeah, I mean, it's all a...
But the culture tells us a lot, and it gives us a starting point. For example, Muay Thai culture, they're not big on heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Which kind of tells us it's not really needed. It could be used effectively if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But these Thai fighters aren't winning because they're stronger on paper. Exactly. They're not squatting more than another guy. They're building strength within the clinching drills and striking and just building years and years of volume.
That's always the interesting thing. I've come across this so much with different athletes. Guys who are complete dog shit in the gym, you know, lift fuck all.
Yeah.
And then they come into wrestling based drills, grappling drills, clinching stuff, and man, they get a hold of you and you cannot move. And it's completely different. And you think, okay, this guy can't even squat 60, 100 kilos, barely bench presses, barely does his gym work. But then when he's out there doing that stuff, it's like that farm boy strength, right? Like they just come in, they have this rugged strength where they can do anything to anyone. They just can't lift the weights.
Yeah. Like we categorize squats and deadlifts as strength training, but we consider clinching, which is also a display of strength. We just consider that, that's skills. That's not strength training. Even though our muscles are contracting the same way. It's categorizations.
Yeah, true. Well, what's your take on the, I guess you could say it's a trend within, it's probably more of a trend within grappling and stuff now than it is within striking. I think striking kind of went through its phase of, it's probably still going on, but went through a phase of real specific style strength training. But for grapplers, you see a lot of it now with jiu-jitsu becoming so popular. You see a lot of stuff like, I've
like
saw
guys
the
on
other day
their back, like they're trying to be an open guard and they got like bands on their knees.
Yep, or dudes being an open guard, or being like De La Riva and some guy pushing on his leg as an isometric, or I saw that the other day. What else did I see? Just guard stuff, and people being in these positions and then using that as part of their strength training. What's your take on that?
I'd say my general take on special exercises in general. I mean, you can look at the Bondarchuk kind of pyramid and see the definition of special developmental exercises. We're either working the skills in parts or we're trying to overload the skill. I think the problem is when Bondarchuk made these definitions, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, for track and field athletes, which were
throws.
mainly power sports for hammer throws and discus. So any like percentile increase in strength I would say transfers more to performance outcomes than it would in combat sports. In combat sports, let's say in submission grappling, we're not looking at how hard you can close your knees together and then we're measuring your adductor strength, right?
Yeah.
It's about leverages and position. So again, the big tactical and strategical element in combat sports kind of negates any small percentage increases in physical abilities.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a good example you meant, obviously, there when you talk about it's not how hard you squeeze your legs together. If you're in some kind of guard and someone moves your leg, you need to have the technical knowledge to be able to, okay, he does this, I do this, or I'm doing something to stop him doing that. And that very rarely comes down to how strong you are in a certain position. You should be able to kind of flow and move between positions.
Exactly.
And
But I would want my athletes to maintain or increase their minimum level of strength, just so it's kind of like in the bag.
Yeah.
But it's all about how you apply those physical abilities.
Yeah, for sure. And if anyone's interested in the Bondarchuk pyramid that Geoffrey referenced, if you go back, Martin Bingasa, one of the older episodes, he dives right into that. He trained under Bondarchuk with his hammer throwing, so he goes deep into that. And also with Nick Garcia, not too long ago too, he uses the Bondarchuk system. He's friends with Martin. He uses the Bondarchuk system with his high school athletes and dives into stuff. We dive into some stuff there as well with Jiu-Jitsu. But man, I think we covered most of the topics here, Geoffrey. If anyone wants to find you and follow what you're doing and everything, where can they do that?
I'm most active on Instagram at GCP Training. I have a lot of articles on my website, which are kind of old, but gcperformancetraining.com. You'll find the ebooks, you'll find the programs there. I'm working hard to release a couple of ebooks, a lot of combat sports programs, S&C programs, some skill development in there as well.
Nice.
But from, I'd say, March till the end of the year, I'm gonna be releasing 3 or 4 projects. So
awesome.
Hard on that.
Nice. And I bought Geoffrey's first book he had on his combat sports preparation. It's really good. So if anyone's interested in that, that covers a lot of the things Geoffrey talked about here too, with his philosophy. So that's definitely worth copying.
Volume 2 is going to blow it away. I've had 3. I would have had, by the time I released Volume 2, I would have had 3 years of
3 years more to build
experience. Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Geoffrey. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man.